for Strategic Affairs. For sake of record, today is Monday, October 21st, October 21st, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have a distinguished guest, Mr. Terry Milewski, who has been on our platform before. Terry does not need any introduction. Terry is a British-Canadian journalist. He retired from CBC in 2016. Since then, he has been an independent journalist, very widely sought. He is very well written. Couple of his books were on Khalistan, which led to death threats against him. And also, for our viewers, World Sikh Organization sued him and CBC for a documentary he had produced. And finally, in 2015, they gave up their lawsuit without any of their demands being fulfilled. And that documentary is still on the archives of CBC. We have talked to Terry since September of 2023. With the ongoing diplomatic saga between Canada and India, it seems like a never-ending tale. And today, he has graciously accepted to come back on our platform. Welcome, Terry, to our platform.
Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed these conversations. I'm happy. I think it's time for another one.
Yes, it is indeed time for another one, but rather than being a free-flowing session, this time we'll have slight difference in the session. This conversation would be much more in the format of questions and answers to go over the specifics, because otherwise we go and discuss generalities without going into the specifics. So I'll be asking you a few questions, and I hope you don't mind. Shall we proceed? So my first question is, Michael Rubin, an independent researcher and analyst with American Enterprise Institute based in Washington, D.C., has come out with a strong suggestion. He suggests that the government of India should declare Canada as a state sponsor of terrorism. As a Canadian citizen, how would you take Michael Rubin's suggestion to government of India?
Yeah, I didn't hear about this. He wants Canada to declare India a state sponsor, or the other way around?
The other way around, that government of India should declare Canada as a state sponsoring terrorism.
Yeah, okay. I was afraid that's what you meant. I'll preface this by saying I have a bit of a cold, so if you may have to cut my mic if I break out coughing. It happens, but so far more or less under control. The short answer is that I think that's quite silly. Canada has closed its eyes for 40 years, shamefully, in my view, to the Khalistani menace, to the threat of violence, and the actual violence perpetrated by Khalistanis based in Canada, to include, obviously, the Kanishka bombing, the bombing of Flight 182, Air India's Flight 182, from Montreal to London on June the 23rd, 1985. With the loss of a total of 331 completely innocent civilian lives, had nothing whatsoever to do with the fight for an independent state. He died for nothing. And Canada certainly did fail to pick up the warnings, fail to respect the warnings offered, even when they were quite explicit, by the government of India. Won't go into detail, just mention one of many items. Telex from Air India headquarters in Mumbai, 3 weeks before the real thing, warning that the Khalistani terrorists were going to try to put bombs in luggage, sabotage Air India planes. There was only one weekly flight by Air India from Toronto and Montreal. We knew which flight it was going to be if they were going to be attacked. Still, knowing all of that, in receipt of this telex, we have received intelligence and warnings up the yin-yang. We have abundant evidence. This is what they're trying to do, and we must have, and I quote, meticulous baggage security and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Oh, no, those Indians, they're always asking for extra free security. We're tired of it. And they put the telex on the shelf where it stayed. They didn't do anything with it. They didn't even give it intelligence service thesis. See, it checked with what they had been hearing, which was also plenty, by the way. So I'm going to let that part go. So far, though, I have not seen any evidence that Canada went beyond being stupid about it. It's one thing to accuse Canada of being complacent, ignorant, lackadaisical, incompetent, choose your adjective, in the face of Khalistani terrorism. But to accuse Canada as being sponsor of terrorism, me, is absurd in the absence of evidence. And there is an absence of evidence, and we all need to respect evidence.
So, Terry, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has a report in 2003 that claims that Canada's security agency had a mole in the group that hatched the plan to bomb Kanishka flight in 1985. This report was published in 2003 and claims that Canadian security and intelligence services pulled out the mole at the last minute so that he would not be implicated. And the name of the mole was Surjan Singh Gill. He was allowed to essentially flee Canada after the event to London, UK, without being charged or without being any action taken. What do you say about that? That is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's report. It is there since 2003 available, and you might have seen it.
I might have seen it. Actually, I wrote it.
Okay.
So I am rather familiar with the story. I was the one covering the Air India trial, and I was the one who broadcast it when I received the transcript of pre-trial interviews conducted by the RCMP with two suspects. And I believe I quoted in that story the RCMP, what they were trying to do, the context of that. And it was a pretty good story, you must admit. The context of that was efforts by the RCMP to crack the suspects, that is to say, to persuade the suspects that they had such abundant and convincing evidence against them that they should just not bother with a trial since the defense was doomed, and that they should fall on their knees and plead guilty, essentially. They should abandon all hope and throw themselves upon the mercy of the court and make what excuses they wanted. They were misled, whatever, but plead guilty. This is your best chance. So, and believe it or not, in such interviews, which occur all over the world, the police are trying to, basically cut to the chase, save a lot of money and time of the courts and witnesses and police time by skipping the awkwardness of an actual trial. And so they were trying to persuade Malik and Bagri, the two accused, Ajit Singh Bagri, and who was Talvinder Parmar's number 2 in the Baba Khalsa, and Rupurban Singh Malik, the wealthy businessman who was the financier of the Baba Khalsa. They were trying to convince them to plead guilty. And in those interviews, they did say that, if you look at this evidence, it sure looks like CSIS had a mole in the plot. And we know who he was. It was probably Surjan Singh Gill. And he was the so-called, by the way, I don't think it's said in the story or the current version thereof is on the CBC website. It's not hidden in any way. And it says there that Surgeon Singh-Gill was the likely suspect, and he was the so-called Consul General of Khalistani, who actually printed up at one point some bogus Khalistan currency with the picture of Bindranwale on it. And he was issuing visas for trips to Khalistan and this sort of nonsense. And then one of the reasons that we think that he was a mole is because he did conveniently quit the Baba Khalsa 2 days before the bombs were placed.
Yes.
When the bombs were shown to him, he realized, oh my, I'm getting in really deep now. And he knew that Parmar had been over to see his bomb maker, Inderjit Rayat, who, by the way, spent nearly 30 years in prison, convicted on 3 occasions. Surgeon Singh-Gill knew that there was something bad going to happen for sure. And when he found out about these bombs, he said, "No, this is too rich for me. I'm out." And he provided a resignation letter. We know that because in the subsequent raid on another Baba Khalsa member, the RCMP obtained the membership forms, the ledger of the current members, those who had paid and those who had not paid. Well, they could pay for his membership. But Surgeon Singh-Gill's resignation letter found in those papers, in that ledger. So the timing was very convenient, and all of this story is substantiated by a very important witness in the Kennedy trial, a lady friend of Ajit Singh Bagri, who said repeatedly to the police and signed statements twice reinforcing it, that the night before the bombs were placed, Bagri had come to her house asking to borrow her car late at night because he needed to take bags to the airport. But don't worry, he would bring the car back because he wasn't going anywhere, only the bags would be going. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? And
So
I'm sorry for giving you this detail, but it just suggests that it's true, because there was a scramble to find transportation to take the bombs to the airport because it was supposed to be Surgeon Singh-Gill's job.
So not only CSIS removed Surgeon Singh-Gill, the mole, from the actual group a couple of days before, they also destroyed a number of wiretapes and evidence on this particular investigation. So if you are actively destroying the evidence that you collected, it tells you the mens rea, the guilty intent, the criminal intent.
Yes. Yes, it does tend to do that, and that's why I say it's an extremely alarming story. There is another side to it, as there always is. Number one, these officers, in making this pitch, had something had a purpose in mind, and they're not necessarily bound to telling the truth, believe it or not. But it does, because of these circumstances and the corroboration provided by Bagri, and also by Bagri himself, who was overheard in London around the same time, visiting a friend with a witness seated nearby who was within earshot, as Bagri described to his friend how he had got the bags to the airport after Surgeon Singh-Gill plot backed out. So we've got several different angles on this story, all of which are tending to rather incriminate Surgeon Singh-Gill. I would, the part that I would differ with is the part that suggests that he was allowed to leave the country. The RCMP at the time did not have a case. They didn't know what CSIS knew, that there were 2 agencies who didn't talk to each other, didn't share intelligence or information that they certainly should have. The RCMP did not know, for example, that CSA held 2 members of the gang to a test bombing in the woods on Vancouver Island. Didn't know that that had happened, and didn't have access to the wiretaps even before they were erased. So it was a bad situation for the prosecution. They had a suspicion that Parmar was involved because they'd been watching him, wiretapping his phone. But they didn't have evidence against him. They didn't have proof, and they wanted to put them under surveillance and find out if they would talk about it on the phone and so forth, in order to get evidence. But in the absence of that evidence, they didn't really have an option to arrest Surgeon Gill, put him in prison for what exactly? Not bombing the aircraft?
So again, it is fumbling of the state agencies that one hand is not talking to the other hand.
Yeah.
But let's move on. Since 2003, there are 26 extradition requests from Government of India to Government of Canada for extradition of wanted terrorists. Some of them have indulged in criminal activities, murders in India of various people, and they are based in Canada. Now, I can understand that you want due process to take over. 26 requests starting from 2003. What is the action taken report by Government of Canada?
I don't know what the Government of Canada is doing with these requests because they don't make such things public. It's considered to be an invasion of people's privacy under the privacy laws. You don't tell reporters or make announcements about people being investigated or what they're being investigated for. You only get an announcement when somebody is arrested and charged and brought to trial on an actual allegation of criminal conduct. And the problem, there is a problem on both sides on this issue because the Indian side has often assumed, to some extent, still assumes even today, that, look, we've designated, for example, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, who seeks for justice, the terrorist. We've designated him as a terrorist. And yet you let him organize and run all over Canada, say what he wants, fomenting hatred against India. How can you do this? The answer is, what law has he broken in Canada? What Canadian law has he broken?
So,
and the complaint is that there is insufficient evidence provided by the Indian side to satisfy the requirements.
that brings me to a very specific question. Both the Mounties in their recent press conference mentioned criminals belonging to Lawrence Bishnoi group
Yes.
have been used by Government of India for activities. But Government of India demanded extradition of members of Lawrence Bishnoi group. How come you are having it both ways? Same way your Minister for Foreign Affairs or External Affairs, Melanie Jolie, harped on the same issue. When there is a pending request for members of the Lawrence Bishnoi group to be extradited, you don't act on extradition, and you have the cheek to accuse Government of India using these criminals. They are on your soil. If you are concerned about it, send them back to India.
This is all fine. I don't disagree with you. And I think that Canada's put itself in a difficult spot for this reason. But I'm still waiting to hear what is the evidence, what is the law that the Canadian laws that these people have broken exactly. It's easy to say members that they're members of the Bishnoi gang, right? And what crimes have they committed, please? Then there's a lot of umming and ahhing. Same thing with Nijar. Pradeep Singh Nijar murdered in Surrey. Same thing with Pannu. I'm always waiting. Give me the specifics. What are the laws that they have broken?
There are also pending extradition requests by India about Goldie Brar gang members.
Yes.
Very specific. These were detailed dossiers. that were given to Canadian government. And government of Canada has not taken any action, only obfuscation, hiding behind that we have due process. Every country has due process. But if these people are involved in murders in India, the two countries that have extradition treaties cannot allow fugitives from law from one country to be given safe harbor. Otherwise, extradition treaties are meaningless.
Yes. So it means that if they can get themselves organized to have any productive relationship again, the two countries should be working together to nail down the evidence and the charges against these various people. But I can tell you that traditionally and for many years, the Canadian authorities have found insufficient evidence in many cases where India seems to have assumed, look, we've designated him a terrorist, that means he's a terrorist, so you should be able to just surrender this person on our say-so. And the Canadians say, no, we need more than that as the evidence, one of the charges. And so we just haven't
So on one hand, you
agreement
say
on that.
have it both ways. You can't say that we don't have enough evidence, and then in the same vein, say that India is using the same criminals. If you are so concerned about their criminal activities on Canadian soil, why don't you pack them back to India?
Which is precisely why I said that Melanie Joly's comments on that matter put Canada in a very difficult spot. I agree with you about that.
Very recently, Indian government has revealed that a member of Canadian Border Security Agency, Sandeep Singh Sidhu, is involved in murder of an Indian citizen in 2020 in conspiracy with, in cahoots with ISI, Lakhvir Singh Rode, who is based in Pakistan. Will get government of Canada, and in fact, this guy was promoted to the post of superintendent in the Canadian Border Agency. Will Canada government extradite him to India because he's wanted for murder?
Depending on what evidence is produced in that case, I would expect.
It is not intelligence,
Canada,
it is evidence. It is
I
not
would
intelligence.
expect that Canada would surrender somebody in such a case. Yes, and that should happen.
Okay, so we have some agreement there. Prime
We have
Minister,
got a lot of agreement.
yeah, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau openly expressed support for farmers' agitation in India in 2020. Was this not political interference by Canada in the domestic and internal affairs of India?
Well, in that case, we disagree. In that case, I think that you could classify Trudeau's comments as foolish or impertinent, but politicians all over the world are asked for their opinions about things happening all over the world, and I think that it was foolish of him to take sides with the farmers against the government. It was, I just think it was reckless, but I don't think it's a firing offense. I think it's, he made a comment that was probably ill-advised, but I wouldn't make too much of it. I think that
and that brings me to the next issue.
Yes.
The Canadian government has consistently challenged in the World Trade Organization farm subsidies given to farmers in India. Canada has been an ardent critic of India's MSP, minimum support prices system, and other agriculture policies at the WTO. And that was the issue on which Indian farmers were agitating, because they wanted much higher MSP to be fixed. So on one hand, Canadian government is criticizing Indian government for even actually having minimum support price. On the other hand, Prime Minister of Canada comes in open and says, I am in favor of this agitation of the farmers. These things do not.
Yes, I mean, I think we're getting into waters now where, we're talking about everything we can dig up that makes look silly. There's much worse though that you could be taxing me with. I mean, and I covered the 2015 election, which brought Justin Trudeau to power, in which he gave the power to name a Liberal candidate in British Columbia against the will of the members of the Liberal Party in British Columbia, gave that right to pick the candidate to the former president of the World Sikh Organization, a separatist organization, which caused 30 members, all of them Sikhs, by the way, to walk out of the Liberal Party. And also covered the 2018 fiasco when Trudeau went to India and invited, or his entourage did, invited a convicted Khalistani terrorist who was guilty of attempted murder back in the day, in the mid-1980s, of a Punjab cabinet minister, Malkia Singh Sidhu, in 1986, I believe. And nobody in his entourage even realized, even thought. One of the RCMP security men with the Prime Minister, one of his MPs, one of his staffers traveling with him around India, not one of them realized it wouldn't be a good idea to have a convicted Khalistani terrorist coming to dinner twice in Mumbai and in New Delhi, glittering diplomatic reception, Prime Minister, and posing for selfies, Prime Minister's wife. None of them realized that that might not look very good. In fact, of course, it was a diplomatic disaster. It seems to me that in the conduct of politics, his position on the MSP with respect to farmers, it seems to me rather a small issue compared with the major political malpractice that Trudeau has practiced for 9 years now.
And while supporting, farmers' agitation in India, Justin Trudeau, his handling of truckers' agitation in Canada when he invoked Emergency Powers Act and stopped the so-called Freedom Convoy, and later on accused Russia of meddling in Canada's internal affairs. Again, you see a lot of internal inconsistencies. You can do anything without any eyelid batting.
Yeah.
But when it happens in your own country, you are crying foul that Russia is interfering in my country.
Well, I mean, if the purpose of your questions is to get me to say that Trudeau hasn't performed particularly well as Prime Minister and has on occasion been an embarrassment to Canada, you've now managed to get me to say yes about 10 times, haven't you? So, I mean, I'm not his spokesman. It seems like you're prosecuting me for things that I agree with.
We are not prosecuting you. We are wanting your opinion, how as a Canadian it looks.
Well, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good at all. And that's it's partly the reason why so many Canadians have decided that he's toast. And the pollsters say if there were an election soon, anytime soon, he would lose it handily.
So again, talking about inconsistencies, you are not in a witness chamber or anything like that, but we just are trying to ascertain an independent opinion that while deposing before the Foreign Interference Commission, Mr. Trudeau agreed that he did not have any concrete evidence. When he made the allegations, he had only intelligence.
Again, I think you're trying to blow up something trivial into something big. To me, distinction between intelligence and evidence, an artificial linguistic quibble that takes us nowhere for this reason. There's no essential difference between intelligence and evidence if the intelligence is factual. If I have intelligence reflecting a fact, and it is a fact, and I can prove it, that's evidence. Facts are evidence. And they can be gathered through intel by intelligence agencies or by policemen gathering evidence for criminal prosecution. If it's a fact, then it's evidence. And I don't get the distinction that is so important. There are many different things, and that
Mr. Trudeau himself made the distinction before the Foreign Interference Commission that he did not have any actual evidence, he had only intelligence. So distinction is being
it
made
was
by
wrongly reported. It was wrongly reported by the Indian media as implying that this was the case, that he meant that in the present. Actually, what he said was at that stage, back when he first raised this with Modi, the G20 a year ago.
There is a researcher in Jawaharlal Nehru University based in New Delhi. His name is Dr. Anand Ranganathan. And he posted two sarcastic tweets on the x.com. And it appears that Canadian government is taking exception to it, saying that Indian media is interfering in Canada's domestic affairs. Any comments on that?
I haven't seen these tweets. I must have missed a couple of tweets there somewhere. You'll have to send them to me. No, I haven't seen that at all.
These are somewhat tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic tweets by a college professor, a university professor, and researcher. And Justin Trudeau government is taking exception to it that Indian media is interfering in Canada's domestic affairs, when as Prime Minister of Canada, he could opine on India's internal issues.
Yeah, but I would like to insist with you, if you don't mind, that laying out a case that Justin Trudeau is a bad man and a lousy prime minister doesn't help us with where do we go from here.
Where do we go from here is the 2025 national elections in Canada. As a person, as an independent journalist, you are privy to all the opinion polls. And the opinion polls show Pierre Poilievre 20 points ahead of Justin Trudeau. Is Justin Trudeau in trouble politically?
He's toast. I mean, that was true, however, before this fiasco with India. It was true before, it'll be true after, and I don't think the India affair is going to be particularly influential. Canadians don't follow that very closely. It's not, front and center on their agenda. They know very little about this file. Many of them assume that all Sikhs are Khalistanis. They have no idea that most are not. And I don't think it has much political effect. As it happens, Trudeau doesn't have the political standing in Canada now as a result of the near universal expectation that he is finished in politics. Doesn't have this personal standing to bring Canadians along with him in his confrontation with the Indian state.
Liberal Party lost two elections, one in Montreal, the second
Yes.
one in St. Paul, Toronto.
Yes.
There were 20 Liberal Party MPs who apparently signed a letter, which is a private letter.
I think it's more than that now.
Yeah, asking for change in leadership, and possibly more people are added. Will he survive till 2025 elections, or Liberal Party MPs will force change of leadership?
Well, there is a note of it's a good question, because there is a note of desperation within the ranks of the party. And I no longer cover Canadian politics day to day. I'm not hanging around Parliament Hill. I'm in retirement. But it's quite plain that he just doesn't have any personal credibility left, and that the desperation within Liberal ranks get a new leader in time for the next election, so that they still have a chance, perhaps with new blood in the leader's office, to save their own seats. And so it's self-preservation time now. Those who plan to stay as MP and to keep hold of their seats, they are realizing that they're not going to win them with Trudeau at the helm.
Now, without arousing jingoistic, nationalistic fervor, with tit-for-tat expulsions of 6 diplomats by each country, diplomatic relations are basically, they have no nosedive to a bottom. Do you foresee any chances of any kind of rapprochement, or do you think that they will continue to go down?
Yes, but I don't think it'll come quickly. I can see the best option is not a very good one. There aren't good ones on offer. Best option to me is what I would call a grubby little deal, whereby things get a lot, maybe not everything, but a lot gets swept under the rug. And there's a great show made by India that, look, told the Americans, we've identified, named and shamed and fired the raw officer who was a rogue officer, wasn't acting with approval of the higher ups, who was accused in the American indictments, now 2 indictments, detailing the plot against Panun and against Nijar. One plot, several targets, as you know. And I can see where Vikram Yadav, for example, the alleged officer, I can see where he gets prosecuted in some sort of public trial and and gets some sort of serious sentence, but then a couple of years down the road, he is quietly released and given a gold watch and thanks for his service.
Well, we are not talking about US issues because Canada is not the 51st province of United States. Let's focus on Canada and India.
Yeah, I am, because it's all part of one deal. You asked me is there a way out, and I'm suggesting to you that this is a way out to arrange a deal that covers all 3.
This probably will not happen. The bilateral trade between Canada and India is $8 billion at this point in time. Now, following all this, India canceled a deal to purchase Stryker heavy armored vehicles from Canada. Do you foresee further impact on bilateral trade between Canada and India because of these issues?
I'm sorry, there were a couple of words I missed.
So the bilateral trade is $8 billion.
Yes.
Following this diplomatic row, India cancelled a deal to purchase Stryker heavy armored vehicles from Canada. Do you foresee further impact on bilateral trade
Yes.
because of this?
Absolutely. No question. I'm puzzled by why you suddenly dropped the last question. Weren't interested in that question.
I am just focusing on Canada and India. We will have a separate session, maybe with a US person on US.
Okay, but the fact of the matter is, though, I'm sorry, but there is one plot against several targets, including
I think that is
Panun and Nijar.
That is part of imagination at this point in time. So let's focus on Canada and India, what goes between these 2 sovereign nations.
All right. Well, Canada would have to be part of the same deal that I was describing. But anyway, we can move on. But I just found that
trade with Canada will suffer in future.
Well, of course, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we're upset on both sides about the collapse of our bilateral relations. Both Canada and India benefit greatly from trade between us, and there's more benefits to be had. Now they won't be had for quite some time.
The number of applications by Indian students in Canadian universities is going down. Canada is no longer perceived as a safe option for higher education. Canadian universities traditionally have benefited quite a lot from the students from India.
Yeah.
Possibly they may not be such a large drop from state of Punjab, but from any other state, Indian students are looking for other safer options, whether they are Australia, New Zealand, UK, or US, but certainly not Canada. That would be, that is not actually, that is already a casualty as far as Canada is concerned. Is there a realization on part of Canadian establishment that making a show without any evidence is being counterproductive to Canadian interests?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see on that because we don't know yet. But it is just a show, as you put it. Because as it stands, the question of whether, in fact, Mr. Yadav and Mr. Gupta did indeed plot to kill both Arun and Nijar and others in North America is not settled. There will be prosecutions. Gupta is in U.S. custody, and there are 4 young men in custody in the Nijar case. And these trials, and that of 2 young men charged in the assassination of Recruitment Singh Malik a year earlier, that will also come to trial, I think, in November the 4th, very soon. So, coming down the track are legal proceedings which could severely embarrass either side if it turns out that the case is nonsense, or if it turns out that, yes, indeed, there was this plotting going on, whether with the approval of higher-ups or not, inside the New Delhi apparatus of
We
the
shall see the
Indian
legal
intelligence
outcome of the
services.
cases, and we shall not prematurely judge them. But I have a quote from India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, quote unquote, Canadian diplomats collect information on our military, police profiling people, targeting people to be stopped in Canada. The license they give themselves is totally different from restrictions they impose on diplomats in Canada. Any comments on that?
The license they impose upon who?
Upon diplomats from other countries in Canada, while they are collecting information on Indian military, Indian police, profiling people. That's why 42 people were declared PNG a few months ago. 42 diplomats from Canada are declared PNG for indulging in the same activities.
Yes,
So
I find this a very strange area to get into because I don't think most people really understand what on earth is wrong with diplomats gathering information. What do we send them overseas for? I mean, if Canadian diplomats are not gathering information, they'll be fired. And so it becomes a test of, did they use clandestine method? Oh, what does clandestine mean exactly? I record my phone call with you. You are recording this one with me. You're not doing anything illegal, but is that clandestine if you don't tell? I mean, it's a very shadowy area. And I think that this is, it's bound to be exaggerated. It's an invitation to exaggerate and get people accused of things which are pretty routine in diplomacy.
is Canadian government snooping on Indian diplomats to gather intelligence and recording their communications?
If they, sorry, if they are?
I'm asking if they
are Canadian diplomats recording conversations? Yeah, I would expect that they probably are.
Canadian government snooping on Indian diplomats when they say that they.
Yes, I mean, originally this whole thing began. Sorry, this whole thing began because yes, the Canadians were wiretapping whoever don't know exactly who, but they concluded there were indeed suspicious contacts between people suspected of crimes in Canada and an intelligence officer in New Delhi. Then the Americans confirmed that with their own intelligence. Is one of the reasons, by the way, that Trudeau is limited in revealing his evidence, because it's not his. And under the Five Eyes intelligence sharing agreement, he's not
So
allowed to receive the intelligence but not disseminate. He can't leak their intelligence.
Interfering with communications of any diplomats is against Vienna Convention.
Yes, and it happens all the time.
All you can do is declare them PNG. That's all you can do. But snooping on diplomats of a country by the second country or third country is not permissible. That is violation of international law. Yeah. So
I mean, that's certainly all very interesting, and you could have an interesting legal debate about the Geneva Convention and how much it is flouted by most countries in the world, and routinely. But it doesn't advance the question of whether, in fact, India, through its intelligence agencies, plotted a murder for hire plot in North America.
Sanjay Verma, the departing High Commissioner of India in Canada, in a almost 30-minute interview with Vassie Callops or whatever, on CBC.
Yeah, on CTV.
Yeah, stated that Sikh Canadian terrorists are CSIS's deep assets.
That's six
Canadian terrorists are CSIS's deep assets, Canadian Secret Service agencies.
Deep assets. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Well, that's interesting. I saw the High Commissioner's, or the former High Commissioner's interview. I thought it was deeply unpersuasive. I have to tell you that I don't think he gave a very good account of India's point of view, with which I'm mostly sympathetic. I don't think he did a very good job defending it, I'm afraid, because pretending that not having a visa in time, and it takes too long to get a visa.
That's a different issue, because a 30-minute interview, but he ended the interview by saying that Sikh Canadian terrorists are the deep assets of Canadian intelligence services.
Well, I mean, he can say that. I mean, it may very well be that there are indeed Sikh separatists in Canada. I don't know whether you would call them terrorists or not. I usually call somebody terrorists who engage in actual crimes of terror. I don't. In Canada, we don't call people terrorists because they fly a flag and say Khalistani Zindabad. We call that freedom of speech, not terror. So there's a different understanding of what freedom of speech means, in Canada and in India, which lies at the core of this dispute, by the way. But that's another question. But I can well imagine there may be separatists in Canada who have wormed their way into positions of influence in politics, and perhaps make little calls to a friend in the Canadian intelligence services, and leak here and there on their enemies, and give little tips on who's who and who's threatening who, and whether they do or not, and whether the RCMP can prove the claims that they made in their press conference a week ago, it's the question before us. To me, it seemed like the RCMP were very determined and very confident the volume and the quality of the material that they have gathered. Somebody is definitely going to go on trial beyond the 4 young men arrested in the Nijar murder so far, the 2 arrested in the Malik murder and the 2 charged by the Americans in the plot against Peru. All of these trials are going to bring out evidence which may very well embarrass India as well as Canada and then perhaps the United States.
There are sections in Canadian media that are making allegations that Justin Trudeau and his party have been bribed by Chinese secret services, and there has been a systematic attempt on part of Trudeau regime to whitewash Chinese infiltration in Canada. Any comments?
Well, I don't feel qualified to judge that. I'm an agnostic on whether that's actually happened. I would like to see that proved in court. I'd like to see the detail on who was bribed and by who, because it's easy to make that allegation and very hard to prove. And until it's proven, I can't, I don't think that I'm going to issue my judgment.
I can understand that, but these allegations are coming from Canadian sources.
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're rock solid, does it?
Well, we are not just asking for your opinion. We are not saying whether they are true or not true, but just your opinion. That is what we were asking you. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Milluski. Thank you very much indeed for coming to our platform. As I said, that instead of talking in generalities, I'm going to ask very specific questions, because otherwise the specific questions remain unanswered. And we shall continue with this, because this saga is not going to end.
Yeah, it's going to get interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Once the trials begin, we're all going to learn new things.
We shall wait and watch on the final.
Okay. All right.
Thank
Thanks
you
for calling.
very much indeed.